So, imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome was the number one topic that came up. And it's quite remarkable, really, because I could have guessed it before the session was starting. As I was doing the survey, I knew that that was going to be one of the number one things because almost every single session that I run in Salesforce, every single session that I run one on one, this tends to come up in some kind of form. And I find it a little bit baffling because it's like everybody goes through this at some point in their life. And I think anybody who tells you otherwise is not necessarily being truthful about their experiences. And it just makes you wonder that if everybody is going through this, then why does it even exist? Now, this cartoon pretty much sums it up. So we've got this person here on stage who has evidently won something, right? It's an award ceremony. They're being congratulated. They're being clapped by the audience. But they're sat there thinking, or stood there thinking they're going to be caught out. They didn't deserve what they achieved. It was all down to luck, that they're a fraud. And I remember there's two people in my life who stand out for this. One of them is probably the best leader that I have ever worked for. And catching up after I'd moved on from his team, he said to me that he was talking about all the work that he was doing with a customer. And I was like, wow, you've got this all together. And he said, the thing is, I'm not really doing anything. It's like I'm just waiting for the customer to just find out that I'm a phony, that I'm a fraud, and that it's actually other people that are doing all the work. And I'm like, but this is remarkable because you're not, you know that it's your leadership that is guiding the team to do all these good and great things. And there's me looking at him as he's the best leader that I ever worked for and appearing as though he's got everything together, but he's there feeling this way. And another one is there was a guy who I did my coaching certification with. He's probably one of the most proficient coaches that I've ever worked with. He's an MBE, and he's just on it, right? You look at his social media, and he's always talking about the things that he's done, and he's just absolutely got it all together. But he was talking about when he was going off and doing some volunteer work at his university, he was sat amongst a whole series of executives in the room because he's on the board of advisors at the university. And he's like, he's there sat in his hoodie, and there's all these executives sat there in their shirt, ties, suits, and things like that. And he just felt so out of place. He felt as though it's like when someone just going to basically tell me to get out, that I'm not worthy of being here. It's like from the outside, you would look at him and think like, wow, like this guy is incredible. He's achieved so much in his life. But then he sat there on the inside going, I'm a fraud, I'm a phony, I don't deserve to be here, I get caught out. And the thing is, every single one of us feels this way at some point in our life. So we need to work to rectify this, right? I always like to explore quotes and go through quotes. And this specific one. So, imposter syndrome is a behavioral health phenomenon. It's described as self-doubt of intellect skills or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. Now, let's just pick this apart a little bit. Now, firstly, the part about it being a behavioral issue. It's habitual. It's something that over time we have created a mindset, a habit, a bit of a default mode that we first kind of pick up on the things of it might be all the things that have not gone so well as opposed to the things that we did good. The second part is that we then tend to excessively ruminate over these things. It's like we've developed this habit. It's like kind of a thing to protect us, but then it kind of doesn't. It kind of works in the opposite way. There's then the self-doubt orientation. This is where basically what we're doing in this behavioral element is we're projecting it out into our future. If X can happen, then it will. And we start to begin to doubt that we can actually go and do something. This is where we may develop a bit of a fear of going to speak on stage or deliver a presentation to a customer or something like that. Now, I'm coming across some real cool research and quotes specifically on this point, where what it's suggesting is that less than 20% of what we think will happen actually does happen. And this is from that bad sense that we tend to overanalyze what is basically going or potentially going to happen within our life, thinking up those worst case scenarios. And this is the point of this survey, it's a survey-based research, that very little of it actually does come off. Now, don't get me wrong, it is good to be prepared in some cases, but we have to recognize when is it we're actually going to draw the line. Now, the other part about this quote was it spoke about high achievers. And I think this is a really important point because have you ever thought that the imposter syndrome that you experience actually comes from the fact that you actually care? I just ruminate over that for a little moment. What would happen if you didn't care? If you didn't care what the outcome was, if you didn't care about your performance, would it really bother you that you're potentially going up on stage in front of 1,000 people? Would it bother you that you're about to deliver to the CEO of one of your biggest customers? Probably not. It's the fact that you care. Now, I find it an interesting switch around that because, as well, it's the fact that we're high performers that imposter syndrome becomes such a big issue. It's because we want to make an impact, we want to make a difference in other people's lives. And we feel that we might get caught out in that process because we're challenging ourselves, we're pushing the boundaries. Well, the thing is, if you didn't do that, then you wouldn't grow, you wouldn't develop. So in some senses, you can say that imposter syndrome can actually be a good thing because it's a recognition that we're actually pushing the boundaries by which we live and work. So now I'm just going to dive down into some of the theory, some of the science. So I've got two studies. The first is the foundational study that essentially unearthed imposter syndrome as a thing. So the hypothesis within this study was that high achieving women, they attribute success to luck rather than their own ability. And just like we've explored here today, they have a significant fear of being exposed as frauds. Now, what they actually did here is use a series of therapy sessions, and they then followed a framework and a series of interviews to just understand the behaviors and also potential changes in behavior of around about 150 highly successful women. Now, what the findings of this were was that despite these women being highly successful, being some of the best that they found in their fields, they almost all dismissed their achievements as just being a result of luck, of being a result of some kind of external factor that they had no influence over. And this is where the model was actually formed by Clance and Imes. And this, I'll walk you through it step by step. It is basically what we go through when we experience imposter syndrome. So it starts off on this top left-hand side that we're given a task that is it's achievement related. It might be a little bit challenging to us. It's not something that is the norm. We then begin to ruminate over this a little bit. We get a little bit anxious, self-doubt, worry. If it's a big presentation that we're delivering in front of our key customer, right? We begin to get a little bit nervous. What if it goes wrong? What if they find out that I don't know as much as I claim that I do? What if they realize that I'm not an expert? What if I don't answer all their questions? One or two things happen from this. We then either over prepare, which means that we put in a significant amount of effort to actually go and resolve this. It's like we go into hyper mode when it comes to studying and things like that. Or we procrastinate. We push it out. We don't like the feeling. We don't like feeling anxious. We don't like our self-doubt. We don't like worrying. We don't like the stress. So we put it off and put it off and put it off until the point in which we have to do it. We're forced to do it. Otherwise, we will be embarrassed. But then we attribute it to luck. It's like, look, we smashed it out of the park. There's an element of luck here because we then went and delivered it. So what then happens is on the side of whichever path we follow there, either over preparation or procrastination, we then go and deliver the result. We accomplish what it is that we set out to do. We have a feeling of relief. It's like, fantastic. It wasn't so bad. It was all right. Brilliant. I've done well there. We receive positive feedback. Brilliant. But then here's where the imposter sets in. This is where we recognize in that presentation, in that session, whatever it was that we did, 9 out of 10 things went perfect. What about that one thing? What about that one question that we didn't answer? What about that one slip up in the demo that it didn't quite work out right? What about that one person in the audience that heckled you a little bit? This is where we begin to laser-like focus on that one thing. We discount the positive feedback. We begin to focus on it. Well, what if I had done this differently? What if I had done that differently? What if I had prepared differently? We discount all of the good stuff, all of the amazing feedback, all of the round of applause that we received. And then we loop back across that left-hand side. We perceive ourselves as a fraud. We attribute it to luck. Our self-doubt increases. We become a bit more nervous about the next session that we need to do like this. There's even a potential more serious consequence, depression, anxiety. And then we go through this all again. And it may reach a point where we become more accomplished. Over time, we will begin to recognize that if it comes to delivering presentations on stage, after 10, 15, 20 of them, we will probably begin to realize that actually we're pretty accomplished at this. And then much of that right-hand side tends to go away. But until that point, this is a cycle that we will all go through. So the final study that I'm going to talk about is Sokulku and Alexander. And this was a meta-analysis, which is basically an analysis of a whole series of studies. So in this case, there was 12 key studies that was analysed. And this was the link into mental health. So what the hypothesis was that there must be a link between imposter syndrome and mental health. Now, the method here was assessing 12 key literature pieces in this mental health space. And what they were looking for is for links into imposter syndrome-like behavior. And then they would dive deep and review that specific chosen literature. Now, what they found from this is that imposter fears have the capacity to affect psychological health and well-being. It's not limited to high achievers. It's not limited to women. It's where perfectionism becomes an issue. Anxiety becomes an issue amongst other psychological conditions. Now, this is the more serious side of it, that if we don't get a grasp of feeling like an imposter, then it basically controls us. It's like I mentioned earlier, it can be our friend. It can help us to grow and develop. If we didn't have it, then we'd not be challenging ourselves. We'd not be knowing that we're growing. So there's an element of acceptance that we need to do here. So to summarize this, so what does the research actually tell us? So first off, it's that we need to normalize the experience of imposter syndrome. It speaks volumes that from the survey, so 35 people signed up, there was around about 25% that actually submitted it. So I can't remember the exact number, but let's say it was 8, 9 of you who responded to the survey. That's a significant amount of people. What, 8, 9 people saying that you experienced imposter syndrome. I hold my hand up. Me too. There's certain experiences in my life that I suffer imposter syndrome about. It's just that thing. We need to normalize it. We need to recognize everybody goes through this. It's a part of our growth. It's a part of life. The research also talked about that impact on mental well-being. And this is where the resources that we're going to go through, the exercises we're going to go through in a moment, actually will help with this. That it's helping us to accept it, to use it, to help us recognize when it occurs, so then we can just blast through it and overcome it. And relating to this, it's that imposter syndrome is a behavioral thing, it's habitual. So, what that also means is that behavioral tools can actually help to combat it as well. So, here's where we're going to basically get down into the actual coaching exercises and get hands on with this stuff. So, the first one, it isn't actually an asset in the portal. So, this is one that I use myself with my coaching clients one on one. And used in the right way, it is hugely effective at overcoming imposter syndrome. So, what I need you to do is grab a piece of paper, could be a journal. You may use your tablet, depends how you use if you have a tablet. So, on the piece of paper, you should draw a line from top to bottom, right the way down the middle, creating roughly equal space on both sides of this. At the top of the left column, write wins, big, bold letters. On the right-hand side, write lessons, in big, bold letters. You can maybe see where this is going. So I'm going to get some music, if the music will work. And for the next 3 to 5 minutes, I want you to write every single thing that you can think of in both columns. This could be something incredibly small or seemingly incredibly small. Something like, I ate breakfast this morning. That could be an absolute win for some people. Could be, I got up out of bed this morning. You know, the foundations of gratitude. I got up before my alarm. I exercised this morning. In terms of a lesson, it could be, I didn't get to walk the dog this morning. Just anything, however big, however small, just basically write them down in those columns. And then we'll basically come back. So let me start the music. I don't know if this is going to work for the audio, but I will listen to the recording and see. All right. We'll come back shortly. You're running blind, following your feet to try, and outrun your fate. Standing in a field of flowers, surfboards is the love, or hollering your name. Is it paradise? Only if it blows your mind and then blows away. Sometimes you will. Sometimes you have to run and steal. Call it cinema, or call it second sight. Now they treat them all the same, and it's the thinnest line. From you, we're holding my hands and say, what if I only you to put? I want to tell that if I could have led a different life, could have led a different life. But now I need somebody who gets my mind, need somebody who gets my mind. You know I could have led a different life, could have led a different life. Pulling me aside, giving me your last advice, and the whole house shakes. See, keep it in the family hide. Don't make the mistakes that I did. Into the way I sold away. And I wouldn't try it if only was black and white. But it's fully clear. Sometimes you feel. Sometimes you feel. It's been about 5 minutes focusing on that exercise. Now, hopefully, what you should have is a oh, I think my connection just dived there a little bit. So let me share the screen again. Just as I was coming back as well. So there we go. Right. So what you should have is hopefully a sizable list of both wins and also lessons. What you should also see is that the wins on the left, there should be significantly more of them than the lessons on the right. What I'd suggest is that if you do find that that isn't the case, that you have maybe more lessons of equal number, then maybe you're being a little bit too harsh on yourself. Because there's a lot of things that we have in life that we do tend to overlook, that we tend to take a little bit for granted. And even things like having a roof over our head, having food in the fridge, having clean water, things like that should be seen as a win ultimately. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who don't have access to these things. So the next part of this is to just take a moment to just think about the habit that you could potentially instill around this, right? How can you remind yourself of this list when you're maybe feeling a little bit down, when you're feeling a little bit imposterish, when when you've got something big coming up that you're feeling a bit anxious and nervous about, just to give yourself that little bit of a nudge to say, I can do this. So this might be, you might put this specific sheet somewhere where it can easily be visible for you. You might turn it into a document that you can laminate. You might even choose to redo this exercise every month, every week, or whatever works for you. So just take a moment to just have a think about what action might you take to form a habit on this. I'll just leave you to noodle over that just for 30 seconds or so. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to the next exercise. And I'm really frustrated by this because the QR codes haven't actually appeared for these assets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the QR code into the chat. Right, so there's the QR code for this next asset that we're actually going to work through. So this one, overcoming negative self-talk. So this is within the repository. So you can go and find this asset in there. That link will take you directly to it. Ideally, try and open this up within some kind of PDF reader because then you can begin to edit this. Alternatively, if you're just working off a piece of paper, when you actually go out into the asset, you can just write down the sections that you're working on. So this is basically the file. If you've been and taken a look at any of these exercises and assets, you'll see they follow the same kind of branding, different kind of formats as you go through them. But in essence, this is just basically a worksheet. We've got different exercises for you to work through. So what I want you to do specifically with this one is just want you to pause for a moment and just close your eyes and just take a deep breath. Let's breathe through our nose and then release. Let's just try to relax a little. So just take another deep breath in through the nose and deep down into the belly. Once again, last deep breath. Right. With your eyes still closed and your breath just returning to normal, I'd like you to explore a situation where maybe you haven't been as kind to yourself as you would have hoped. Just bring to mind that situation. What happened? Why did it happen? You may relive that situation. You may just be thinking about what happened. Just try to see as much detail about the situation as you can. So now let's take a deep breath again, in through the nose and out through the mouth. And with your eyes still closed, let's just explore a situation where you was incredibly kind to yourself. Again, what happened? What came up for you? Just notice any little details about that situation. And when you're ready, let's just take another deep breath and release. And just when you're ready, just open your eyes, bring yourself back into the room. So what we're now going to do is work through this exercise. So if you can either edit the PDF directly, or you may choose to just write the sections down. The first part is about identifying and labeling the experiences. So in both counts, so what is it that came up? What was it that you was telling yourself? You may choose to focus on the negative first and then the positive, but what were the things that were coming up for you? Just write each down on a different line. Let's just spend a minute or so doing this. So you should hopefully have a fair few examples there to go and explore. So now focusing on the negative side of things, I want you to begin to challenge the thought. So on those negative aspects, maybe write down some of the key ones and leave space to ask yourself a question about it. So you can see some examples here on the screen. So you may have said in a certain experience, that was so stupid of me. Now the question here is this really true? Did you know anything different in that given moment? Maybe what could you have done differently? What could you ask yourself there to do differently? You may have said, I'm never going to get this right. Now, that's a strong, bold statement. What evidence do you have that you will never get it right? Is there something that you can do that could increase the chances of you getting it right? So just pick some of those negative statements, a few of them, and let's try to reframe them. So if you go ahead just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay. So challenging some of those thoughts. So there's been some good, interesting questions that have basically come up for you all. So this next part is then where we're actually replacing this negative thought. So now that you've challenged it, how is it we can replace it? So just going back to those examples we had before, where you may have said that was so stupid of me. There might be now a recognition where you can say, well, yeah, you know what? I made a mistake, but I'm learning, I'm growing. We all make mistakes. It's okay. I can just do better next time. Or it might be where you may have said, I'm never going to get this right. So again, I'm learning a new skill. I can basically use different resources that I've now got access to help me to reach my goal. It'll be cool. It'll work out. You just go again, go for a few minutes, pick some of those negative thoughts, some of the challenges that you presented, and also what your reframe could be on that specific thought. Okay, you just draw that one to a close as well. So this exercise has been all about how we can take a negative experience, a negative thought that we have had, and how we can just begin to ask ourselves a couple of different questions about it, and to just watch the language that we are using. I know my coach always tells me off for the language that I use. It's all about the reframe. It's so important that our inner dialogue, that little narrative that we have is framed in the right way, because that can really shape our experiences. Now, I'm conscious of time. I did say that we were going to go a little bit over on this one because this session, unlike the others, has the intro part on it. What I'm not going to do, though, is go through each of the other exercises individually because that will probably take us through till about 9:30, 9:45. But what I will do is basically just briefly talk through what these exercises actually are. So basically this one, which again, the link will be going into the chat. So this one is about the self-worth. It extends on the exercise that we've just been through. The premise again is do a breathing exercise. Reflect on some of those times where you've been most critical of yourself. Hopefully, several situations in which this would be the case, because then you can draw on those. Reflect on basically what happens, what did you do, why did you do it. Within the exercise, I'll show you the specific parts. So zoom out. So the first part of the exercise is to basically identify any of the habits that you might have in your life that could actually be it kind of manifesting imposter syndrome. So things like, do you compare yourself to others? Do you regularly put yourself down? Do you look for the things in an experience and in a situation that aren't conducive with your growth and you're actually being negative towards yourself? Is it that you avoid certain things? Maybe you don't like certain outcomes. It's about identifying some of these things. Procrastination is usually a big one. But what I'd implore you to do with procrastination specifically is to dive down into a little bit of maybe the reason why, because there's always a reason why that we begin to do that. So the next part, step two, is to understand a little bit about it. It's how did those specific experiences make you feel? How do you think they actually affect your life, your relationships, your career, your general health, happiness, and so on? Next part is where we begin to work. So, what are those replacement habits that we are actually going to do? So, is it that on a daily basis, you're going to practice positive self talk? Is it that you're going to set realistic goals? Is there a way that you can begin to challenge the negative thoughts, just like we've done in that previous exercise? That you can do that on a regular basis, build a habit of doing this. Now, mindfulness is a great practice, which is why, as I mentioned at the start, that we're basically exploring this on a bi-weekly basis. Because mindfulness, it will help you to introspect a lot more about your thoughts, your feelings, emotions, and so on. And then finally, with this exercise, this is then about taking action. So, what specific things are you going to do and when? Okay. So then the next exercise, the final one, is this is quite a detailed one. It's about discovering yourself. So again, doing some breathing exercises to basically just get you into the moment, get you into that present space. And I'd like you to reflect on your life to date. I'd like you to understand today, right now, where is it that you feel as though you want to head? Where do you want to go? Also, have a look at some of the good memories that you have. What is it that stands out to you? What were important events or milestones in your life? Was there anyone significant who was involved in this? So then the specific exercise here is first off, identify your core values. So what are the things that are incredibly important to you? Is it relationships? Is it family? Is it security? Is it career? What are these areas that are incredibly important? There is actually a totally separate asset to this in the repository that will allow you to go really, really deep on this specific topic. The next part is about examining your beliefs. So begin to ask yourself, what do you believe about yourself? What is it you believe about your abilities, about your potential, about your worth? You might have a belief of, I am capable of achieving great things. You might have one of, I am not worthy of love or respect. These could be positive or they could be negative. So then the next part is about exploring your passions. So what do you love doing? What passions do you have that bring you joy and fulfillment? Before then going on to your experiences, reflecting on them. So how do your experiences match up to those things that you noted in the first three exercises? The values that you instill, the interests and passions that you have, the beliefs that you have. How is it that your experiences match up to those? Then about identifying your strengths and weaknesses. What are you good at? What are you great at? What are you not so good at? What are you not so great at? Then let's set a goal. How is it you can improve on these things? How can you use more of the things that you are so great at? So if you have to go through those, that's basically the homework that I've kind of set. But let's first summarize where we've come from. So first off, we've identified that imposter syndrome is a behavioral issue. So in the exercises specifically, we explored the alternatives to us experiencing this, how we can actually replace it. We also figured out that it was habitual, that it's something that over the course of our life has always been present. It probably always will be present. It's a case of how we respond to it, what counter habits we can actually build. It's also about how self-compassion needs to become a no-brainer, that we need to be kinder to ourselves. And the success log exercise, it makes it difficult to ignore that our wins far outweigh the learning opportunity. There's also a recognition of acceptance, that over time we figure out that our inner imposter, it'll always be there. It's just how we make it work for us. So what we've been through today is actually one missing from this, from the image. So we've explored the psychological principles of imposter syndrome. We've looked at the scientific research that underpins imposter syndrome. We've built our success log using the imposter eradicator method. We've also explored our self-talk in the overcoming negative self-talk worksheet. We've actually applied something, developed something here. Now, where we go next is those two assets that I'd mentioned. Work to build a habit of self-worth and do this with that protection worksheet. The second one is then about the self-discovery coaching worksheet, and this will help to strengthen foundational areas in our life. Then it's also for you to reflect on the next session that I'm going to host, which this next session is on goal setting and motivation. So this is the mindfulness oriented session that we're going to do next time.